The moment you think silence means someone stopped loving you is often the moment you stop listening. I zipped my overnight bag just loud enough for the sound to carry down the hallway, then paused with my hand resting on the handle. The house answered with nothing. No footsteps. No voice asking where I was going. No desperate plea to stay. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the kitchen clock, and the faint static whisper coming from the baby monitor sitting on the entry table. 3 years ago, if I had picked up a suitcase, Noah would have crossed the room before I could even reach the front door. He would have wrapped his arms around me, smiled that quiet smile that had made me believe forever was something ordinary people could actually have, and told me we would figure everything out together. Now forever felt like a word someone else had invented for happier couples. I slipped my wedding ring off for a second, turning it between my fingers before sliding it back into place. I wasn't leaving because I wanted to. I was leaving because I couldn't remember the last time my husband looked at me instead of through me. Ever since Lily had been born 8 months earlier, our home had slowly transformed into a place where schedules mattered more than conversations. Bottles, diapers, pediatric appointments, grocery lists, laundry, work emails answered late into the night. We existed beside each other like co-workers assigned to the same impossible project, instead of two people who had once laughed until sunrise over cheap takeout and burnt pancakes. Friends kept telling me this season would pass, that new parents always struggled, but struggle wasn't what scared me. Silence did. Noah had become frighteningly good at it. He came home late, kissed Lily's forehead every evening, asked if I needed anything, and disappeared into his office with another apology about deadlines. Every apology sounded sincere. Every apology also built another brick in the invisible wall growing between us. Last week I asked if we could spend one evening together after Lily fell asleep. He smiled without meeting my eyes and promised next weekend. Before that weekend arrived, another meeting appeared on his calendar. Before that meeting ended, another excuse replaced it. I stopped asking. Maybe that's how marriages quietly fall apart. Not because of one terrible mistake, but because eventually one person becomes tired of knocking on a door that never opens. I reached for the front doorknob and deliberately let it click a little louder than necessary. My phone stayed in my pocket, but I left the baby monitor receiver on the small table beneath the framed family photo from Lily's dedication. Noah assumed I always carried it whenever I stepped outside. Tonight, I left it behind on purpose. Earlier that afternoon, I had charged the battery and tested the signal from the detached garage at the edge of our backyard. It reached perfectly. The idea had arrived without warning while I folded Lily's tiny pajamas. I hated myself for even thinking about it. Good spouses didn't test each other. They trusted each other. But trust had become difficult when every conversation ended before it truly began. The front door closed behind me with a gentle thud. I counted slowly as I walked across the porch, down the 3 wooden steps, and toward the garage. 1, 2, 3. At 10 I expected the house to remain completely still. At 20 I expected Noah to continue working upstairs. At 30 I heard footsteps. My heartbeat stumbled. I slipped inside the dark garage and quietly closed the side door, pulling the baby monitor receiver from my coat pocket where I had hidden it moments earlier after circling back through the side entrance, while Noah was still upstairs. The tiny screen flickered to life with the grainy black and white image of Lily sleeping peacefully in her crib. Her stuffed rabbit rested beside her tiny hand. Then another shape entered the frame. Noah sat down in the rocking chair beside her, leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and buried his face in his hands. For almost a full minute, he didn't say a single word. Then he lifted his head, looked at our sleeping daughter, and took a long, unsteady breath that sounded nothing like the calm man I believed I had been living with. Noah stayed perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Lily as though memorizing every tiny breath she took. I pressed the baby monitor closer to my ear, hardly daring to breathe myself. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways over the past few days. I thought I might hear relief that I was finally gone. I thought I might hear him calling a friend to admit our marriage had been over for months. I even prepared myself to hear nothing at all, believing indifference would hurt less than rejection. Instead, his voice came quietly into the speaker, almost too soft for the monitor to catch. "Hey, Peanut," he whispered, brushing a loose curl away from Lily's forehead. "Mommy thinks I do not see how hard she tries." He smiled, but it disappeared almost as quickly as it came. "Truth is, I see everything." My fingers tightened around the receiver. Every word seemed to echo inside the small garage until I could no longer hear the rain beginning to tap against the roof overhead. Noah leaned back in the rocking chair, letting it sway gently. "I see her waking up before sunrise because she wants you to have your favorite oatmeal ready before daycare. I see her pretending she is not exhausted because she does not want me worrying during meetings. I see her reading parenting books after you fall asleep because she thinks there is always something she could do better." His voice cracked slightly before he cleared his throat. "She thinks I stopped paying attention, but I never stopped." A lump formed in my throat, so suddenly it almost hurt. For months I had convinced myself my sacrifices had become invisible. Somehow the man sitting in that nursery had noticed details I never realized anyone saw. Noah rested one hand against the crib rail. "You know what the worst part is, sweetheart?" he continued. "She smiles at me every morning, even after I disappoint her again." He let out a humorless laugh. "She deserves someone who comes home before dinner. Someone who remembers date nights without setting reminders. Someone who is not checking his phone while she is telling him about her day." My heartbeat became uneven. This was not the conversation I expected to overhear. It felt like I had opened the wrong door and walked into a life that belonged to another couple. Noah lowered his head. "I keep telling myself this project is almost over. Just one more month." Then another month comes. Another deadline. Another client. Another emergency. He rubbed both hands across his face. "Every time I think I am fixing our future, I end up missing our present." Lily shifted in her sleep, making a tiny sigh that immediately softened Noah's expression. He reached into the crib and gently adjusted her blanket before continuing. "I thought if I worked hard enough, your mom would never have to worry about bills the way we did when we first got married. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted you to grow up in a house where money was never the reason dreams had to wait." His eyes drifted toward the nursery window, where the reflection of the room shimmered against the dark glass. "But somewhere along the way, I started acting like providing was the same thing as loving. It is not." I felt my knees weaken against the garage wall. Every lonely evening replayed itself inside my mind, but now each memory carried another layer I had never seen before. The late nights, the missed dinners, the canceled weekends. I had interpreted every absence as proof I mattered less. Listening now, I realized Noah had been measuring love by responsibility while I had been measuring it by presence. Neither of us had ever explained the difference. He smiled sadly at Lily. "One day you are going to think your dad had everything figured out." He shook his head. "Do not believe it. I spend half my life wondering whether I am failing the two people I love most." The room fell silent again except for the steady rhythm of the rocking chair. Then Noah whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. "I just hope your mommy gives me one more chance before she decides she deserves someone better." My eyes filled with tears before I even realized I was crying. They slid silently down my cheeks as I stood alone in the darkness, listening to the man I had spent months believing no longer loved me. The rain outside grew steadier, tapping softly against the garage roof like an old friend reminding me to stay still. Inside the nursery, Noah reached for the small framed picture sitting beside the rocking chair. It was one of the first photographs we had taken after bringing Lily home from the hospital. I remembered laughing because neither of us had slept for more than 2 hours, yet we had smiled as though exhaustion could never touch us. Noah studied the picture for a long moment before speaking again. "Do you know something funny?" he asked Lily with a faint smile. "Your mommy thinks I stopped noticing him after you were born." He slowly shook his head. The truth is I notice him even more now. His thumb gently brushed across the edge of the picture frame. I notice how he checks on you 3 times before going to bed because he worries you are too warm or too cold. I notice how he pretends to like those frozen breakfast sandwiches whenever I forget to grocery shop because he does not want me feeling guilty. I notice how he waits until the shower is running before crying because he thinks the water hides everything. My entire body froze. I had never told anyone about crying in the shower. Not my sister. Not my closest friend. Somehow Noah had known all along. He had simply never said anything. I wish he knew I hear him anyway, Noah whispered. Not because the walls are thin. Because when you love someone long enough, you start recognizing the sound of their heart breaking even when they try to hide it. I closed my eyes, pressing the receiver against my forehead. Every assumption I had built over the past year began crumbling beneath the weight of those quiet words. Noah leaned back again, his tired eyes drifting toward the ceiling. Dark circles rested beneath them, deeper than I remembered. When had they become so noticeable? When had I stopped looking closely enough to see he was just as worn down as I was? I almost told him last month, Noah admitted. I drove all the way home planning to ask him if we could spend an entire weekend together. No work, no phones, just us. He laughed softly at himself. Then I parked outside and saw him dancing with you in the kitchen through the window. A memory flashed into my mind. Lily had refused to stop crying while I cooked dinner, so I had picked her up and danced around the kitchen to an old Motown playlist. I remembered glancing toward the driveway, thinking I had imagined headlights for a second before they disappeared. I had assumed it belonged to a neighbor. Noah had been there. He looked so happy. Noah continued. I told myself not to interrupt. Then my phone rang. Another client. Another emergency. By the time I finally came inside, he had already put you to bed. His shoulders slumped. That keeps happening. I keep choosing one more call because I think I am protecting our future. Then I miss another piece of our life. He looked down at his wedding band, slowly turning it around his finger exactly the way I always did whenever I was anxious. I had never noticed he shared the habit. Marriage is strange, Peanut, he said quietly. People think it falls apart because of one terrible day. Most of the time it is hundreds of ordinary days where two people slowly convince themselves the other one already knows how much they care. His eyes glistened as he stared at Lily sleeping peacefully beneath her blanket. I have spent months believing your mommy knows I love him. Maybe I stopped saying it because I thought he already understood. Maybe that was the biggest mistake I have ever made. My chest tightened until it almost hurt to breathe. For the first time in nearly a year, I questioned not only what Noah had failed to tell me, but what I had failed to tell him. We had both become fluent in responsibility while forgetting the language that had brought us together in the first place. Then Noah took a slow breath and quietly added something that made my heart stop all over again. Tomorrow morning, I was finally going to tell him the truth about why I have been hiding everything. I only hope I am not already too late. The words echoed through the tiny speaker long after Noah stopped talking. Tomorrow morning. The truth. Hiding everything. My mind searched desperately for an explanation that would fit the man I had just heard, but none of the answers I had invented over the past year matched the quiet honesty in his voice tonight. Noah slowly stood from the rocking chair and walked toward the nursery window. Rain traced thin silver lines across the glass, blurring the backyard into a watercolor painting of shadows and porch lights. He folded his arms, staring into the darkness as though the storm might answer questions he could no longer carry alone. I promised myself I would never keep secrets from your mommy, he said softly. I broke that promise because I convinced myself it was the only way to protect him. I felt my pulse quicken again. Protect me from what? Noah let out a long breath before continuing. 6 months ago, the company lost its biggest contract. Overnight, everything changed. I blinked in disbelief. 6 months ago was exactly when he had started working impossible hours. I remembered asking whether something had happened at the office. He had smiled, kissed my forehead, and told me it was only a busy season. I had accepted the answer because I wanted to believe him. Almost 30 people were going to lose their jobs, he continued. People with mortgages, parents with little kids, couples expecting babies. Some of them have worked beside me for more than a decade. He lowered his head. The board wanted immediate layoffs. They wanted names on their desks by Friday morning. I leaned against the garage wall as another memory returned. That Friday had been our anniversary. Noah had canceled dinner only an hour before our reservation, saying an emergency meeting had come up. I had eaten alone after putting Lily to bed, convinced work mattered more than I did. I could not do it, Noah whispered. Not without trying everything else first. He smiled sadly at Lily. So I volunteered to take over the recovery project. Longer hours, more travel, more responsibility. If I could turn things around, everyone kept their jobs. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaustion visible in every movement. The board agreed, but only if I delivered results before the end of this quarter. My throat tightened. He had never told me any of this. Not once. I wanted to tell your mommy every single day, Noah admitted. But every time I imagined the conversation, I pictured him worrying about bills again. I remembered those first years, when we counted every dollar before grocery shopping and prayed the old car would survive another winter. His eyes drifted toward Lily's crib. He finally sleeps peacefully now. He laughs again. I could not bring myself to take that security away. I remembered those years vividly. Our first apartment had leaked every spring. We celebrated whenever we managed to save $50 at the end of a month. Noah had promised me life would get easier someday. Somehow, after it finally had, he had been carrying the fear of losing it all by himself. The overtime checks helped us stay ahead, he continued. The bonuses went straight into savings. If the project failed, I wanted enough money set aside that your mommy would never have to panic. He gave a tired smile that never reached his eyes. He probably thinks I care more about spreadsheets than family. Tears blurred my vision again, because that was exactly what I had believed. Every late night, every canceled plan, every distracted dinner, I had interpreted them as choices against us when, in Noah's heart, they had been sacrifices for us. I should have trusted him, Noah whispered. He has stood beside me through every difficult season of our lives. Instead, I decided he deserved comfort more than honesty. He shook his head slowly. That was never my decision to make. Lily stirred again, letting out a sleepy little sigh before settling back into peaceful breathing. Noah smiled at her with unmistakable tenderness. Tomorrow morning the board votes on the final proposal. If everything goes the way we hope, every employee keeps their job, my hours finally return to normal, and I can come home before dinner again. His expression softened with quiet determination. The first thing I was planning to do afterward was tell your mommy everything and ask him if he could forgive me for trying to protect him in the worst possible way. My hands were trembling so badly that I almost dropped the baby monitor onto the concrete floor. Everything I had believed for months had been built on conversations that never happened, questions I stopped asking, and answers Noah never trusted me enough to hear. The silence between us had not been empty after all. It had been crowded with fear, love, exhaustion, and assumptions that neither of us knew how to untangle. Inside the nursery, Noah slowly sat back down in the rocking chair, his shoulders sagging as though simply speaking those words aloud had drained the last of his strength. He looked at Lily with the kind of gentle smile that only appeared when he forgot anyone else existed. You are probably going to think your parents are very brave one day, he said quietly. The truth is we are just two people trying very hard not to let each other down. He laughed softly to himself. Sometimes trying too hard becomes its own mistake. I remembered the countless evenings when I had watched him come through the front door looking exhausted. Instead of asking what weighed so heavily on him, I had searched his face for proof that I still mattered. When I failed to find reassurance, I retreated behind my own quiet disappointment. Looking back now, I realized he had been searching my face for something too. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe understanding. Maybe permission to finally admit he could not carry everything alone. Noah reached into the crib and gently held Lily's tiny hand. She wrapped her fingers around one of his without waking, and the sight made his eyes shine with emotion. "Promise me something, little one," he whispered. "When you grow up and you love somebody with your whole heart, do not protect them from the truth by hiding it. Share the heavy days, too. Love is supposed to divide the weight, not double it." His words settled over me like a warm blanket and a sharp ache at the same time. I thought about every difficult season Noah and I had survived together before Lily was born. We had faced job changes, broken appliances, family illnesses, and years when every unexpected expense felt overwhelming. We had always faced those moments side by side. Somewhere along the way, we had quietly decided to carry different burdens alone. Noah took a deep breath before speaking again. "There is one more thing I never told your mommy." My heartbeat immediately quickened. He opened the drawer beside the rocking chair and carefully removed a plain, white envelope. I recognized it instantly. It had been sitting in his office for weeks. I had noticed it several times while putting away clean laundry, but I had never opened it because I wanted to respect his privacy. He looked down at the envelope with a bittersweet smile. "I was waiting until tomorrow." He slid a folded document halfway out before looking back at Lily. "If everything goes well at work, I was finally going to give him this." Curiosity mixed with nervous anticipation inside me. Noah unfolded the paper carefully, smoothing the edges with both hands. "It is the confirmation for our anniversary trip." His smile grew warmer. 7 days in Maine. A little cabin by the ocean. No meetings. No conference calls. No laptops. Just your mommy, you, and me. Tears spilled freely down my face. Last month, I had stumbled across an advertisement for coastal cottages in Maine on his computer. I had assumed he was planning another business trip because he closed the browser so quickly when I entered the room. I had quietly convinced myself he did not want me asking questions. In reality, he had been hiding a surprise. "I even asked your grandmother if she would watch you for one afternoon while I took your mommy sailing," Noah said with a shy grin. He has always wanted to see a lighthouse up close. My knees weakened again. Years earlier, during one of our very first road trips together, I had casually mentioned that visiting the rocky coast of Maine was on my bucket list. I had completely forgotten saying it. Noah had remembered. He remembered everything. He carefully folded the papers again and rested the envelope on his lap before looking toward the bedroom door with quiet sadness. "I only hope I have not waited so long that he has already stopped believing in us." For several long seconds I could not move. The rain had slowed to a faint drizzle, but inside me everything was changing at once. The garage no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like the last wall standing between the life I thought I had lost and the truth waiting only a few yards away. I stared at the tiny screen in my hand. Noah was still holding the envelope, his eyes fixed on Lily. With the exhausted expression of a man who had spent far too long fighting battles in silence. My heart told me to run back into the house. My fear told me to wait until morning. Then Noah spoke again, almost in a whisper. "I do not know if your mommy packed enough clothes for wherever he is going." My breath caught. He looked toward the hallway outside the nursery, his voice growing even quieter. I heard the suitcase zipper. I heard the front door. He swallowed hard before forcing a small smile that never reached his eyes. Maybe he just needed some air. Maybe he is staying with a friend. Maybe he finally decided he deserves someone who actually knows how to be present. His shoulders sagged as if each possibility carried its own weight. If that is what he chooses, I cannot blame him. The words struck harder than anything else I had heard that night. I had wanted Noah to notice my leaving. I had wanted proof that it mattered. I never imagined he would quietly accept the blame instead of defending himself. He leaned closer to Lily and gently kissed the top of her head. "If he really leaves," he whispered, "promise me you will never think badly of him. He gave me the happiest years of my life. He gave me you. If he cannot stay, it is because I made loving me too lonely." A sob escaped my lips before I could stop it. It was soft, but in the silence of the garage it sounded impossibly loud to my own ears. I covered my mouth with my free hand, terrified Noah might somehow hear me through the walls. Tears blurred the tiny image on the monitor until I could barely make out his face. Every memory I had replayed with bitterness suddenly rearranged itself. The late dinners, the distracted conversations, the forgotten weekends. None of them had come from a lack of love. They had come from two people silently sacrificing different parts of themselves without ever admitting how much they were hurting. Noah carefully placed the envelope back into the drawer and rested both hands on the arms of the rocking chair. "Tomorrow," he said, almost as though he were making a promise to himself, "I am going to tell him everything before he has the chance to ask. No more hiding. No more pretending I can solve every problem alone. If he is angry, I will listen. If he cries, I will stay. If he tells me I have broken his trust, I will spend however long it takes earning it back." He looked at Lily again, and for the first time that evening there was a small spark of hope in his eyes. "I just need one more chance." That single sentence dissolved the last excuse I had for remaining outside. I realized I had been waiting for Noah to open a door that he had already unlocked. I was the one still standing on the other side, afraid to turn the handle. My legs finally obeyed me. I slipped the baby monitor into my coat pocket, wiped my face with trembling hands, and quietly stepped out into the cool night air. The wet grass soaked through my shoes as I crossed the backyard toward the porch. Every step felt lighter than the one before, yet my heart pounded harder with each foot of distance I closed. Warm light spilled through the front windows, turning the familiar house into something that suddenly felt new again. I climbed the 3 wooden steps I had walked down less than an hour earlier, reached for the doorknob with an unsteady hand, and realized that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is walk back into the conversation they were certain had already ended. My hand rested on the doorknob for only a second before I turned it. The familiar click echoed through the quiet house, and for the first time in months I did not hesitate. I slipped off my rain-soaked shoes, closed the door as gently as I could, and stood in the entryway listening to the faint sound of the rocking chair upstairs. Every instinct told me to rehearse what I wanted to say, but every carefully prepared speech had already become meaningless. The truth had changed everything. I climbed the staircase slowly, one step at a time, until I reached the nursery door. It was slightly open. Warm light spilled into the hallway, and through the narrow gap I saw Noah still sitting beside Lily's crib. He had not noticed me. He was watching our daughter sleep with the quiet expression of someone trying to memorize peace before another difficult day began. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped. Instead, I gently pushed the door open. The old floorboard near the entrance gave its familiar creak. Noah turned immediately. For one suspended moment, neither of us spoke. Surprise flashed across his face, followed by confusion, then concern. His eyes drifted toward my damp jacket and the small overnight bag still hanging from my shoulder. He slowly stood from the rocking chair. "Ethan?" he asked softly. "I thought." His voice faded before he finished the sentence. I stepped into the room and quietly set the bag on the floor. My eyes found the white envelope sticking halfway out of the drawer beside the chair. Then they returned to Noah. "I never actually left," I said, my voice trembling despite every attempt to steady it. His eyebrows drew together. "What do you mean?" I reached into my coat pocket and slowly placed the baby monitor receiver on the changing table between us. The color drained from his face as his eyes settled on the screen. He understood before I needed to explain another word. A mixture of embarrassment, fear, and vulnerability crossed his expression all at once. "You heard me," he whispered. I nodded. I heard everything. Silence settled over the nursery, but this time it felt different. It was no longer a wall separating us. It was simply two people searching for the courage to tell the truth. Noah looked down at the floor. "I never wanted you to find out like that." I took one careful step closer. "Then how were you planning to let me find out?" He closed his eyes for a brief moment before answering. Tomorrow. He looked back at me, his eyes filled with regret. After the board meeting. After I knew everyone would keep their jobs. After I could promise you the long nights were finally over. I shook my head gently, not in anger but in disbelief. You carried all of that by yourself. Noah gave a tired smile. I thought I was protecting you. I felt fresh tears gather again. You were protecting me from a conversation I would have chosen to have with you on the very first day. His shoulders slumped. I know that now. I took another step until only a few feet separated us. Do you know what I spent these last 6 months? Protecting you from? He looked at me silently. My disappointment. My loneliness. My fear that I was losing you. I let out a shaky breath. I had all of that because I thought adding one more problem to your life would only make things worse. Noah stared at me, and for the first time we both recognized the painful symmetry of what we had done. We had built identical walls from opposite sides without realizing we were trapping ourselves together. A faint laugh escaped both of us at nearly the same moment, not because anything was funny, but because the absurd truth had finally become impossible to ignore. Noah rubbed his eyes and quietly said, "We spent months trying to protect each other from exactly the things we needed to share." I nodded through my tears. And somehow we both believed we were the only one hurting. Lily stirred softly in her crib before settling again, her peaceful breathing filling the room with a gentle rhythm. Noah glanced toward her and then back at me. "I do not expect forgiveness tonight," he said honestly. "But I am done hiding. You can ask me anything, and I will answer every question." I looked at the man I had fallen in love with years earlier and realized he was still standing right in front of me. Beneath the exhaustion, beneath the fear, beneath every mistake, he had never stopped reaching for our family. This time, instead of waiting for him to cross the distance alone, I took the final step toward him myself. Noah reached for my hand with a hesitation that broke my heart more than any argument ever could. It was the hesitation of someone who no longer believed he had the right to ask for comfort. I closed the distance myself and wrapped my fingers around his before he could pull away. Neither of us said anything for several seconds. We simply stood there beside Lily's crib, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing, as if it were reminding us that the most important parts of life had never stopped waiting for us. Noah looked down at our hands and released a slow breath. "I forgot that marriage was supposed to mean two people carrying the same load," he admitted. "Somewhere along the way I decided that loving you meant making sure you never had to see how difficult life became." I gently shook my head. "And I decided loving you meant pretending I was strong enough to handle every lonely night without telling you how much I missed you." We both smiled sadly at the realization. There was no villain standing in the room with us. There had only been fear wearing different disguises. Noah walked to the nursery dresser and opened the top drawer once more. He handed me the white envelope without saying a word. This time I accepted it. Inside were reservation confirmations for a small oceanfront cabin in Maine, tickets for a lighthouse tour, and a handwritten note folded between the pages. My hands trembled as I opened it. The familiar handwriting immediately brought fresh tears to my eyes. It read, "If you are reading this, then work finally stopped deciding our schedule. Thank you for believing in me even on the days when I forgot how to show you how much I believed in us. I cannot give you back the evenings I missed, but I hope I can spend the rest of my life making new memories together." I looked up to find Noah watching me anxiously. "You wrote this weeks ago?" He nodded. I kept waiting for the perfect moment. I smiled through my tears. Maybe perfect moments do not exist. Maybe we just have honest ones. He laughed quietly, the sound carrying a warmth I had not heard in months. "I think you are right." We carried the rocking chair closer to the nursery window and sat together while Lily continued sleeping peacefully. For the next hour, we talked more honestly than we had in an entire year. I admitted how invisible I had felt whenever another dinner grew cold on the kitchen table. Noah admitted that every missed evening filled him with guilt before he even walked through the front door. I confessed that I had almost convinced myself he no longer loved me. He confessed that he had quietly feared I would eventually realize I deserved someone less consumed by responsibility. Every difficult conversation we had postponed finally found its place in the open. We did not interrupt each other. We did not defend ourselves. We simply listened. When the conversation slowed, Noah reached for a notebook sitting on the bookshelf. "Can we make one promise?" he asked. "Actually, several promises." He opened to a blank page and wrote the first sentence across the top in careful letters. "No difficult feeling waits until tomorrow." He looked at me. "Even if the timing is terrible." I nodded. "Especially then." Together we added more. One dinner every week without phones. One evening every month that belonged only to us, even if it meant ordering pizza after Lily fell asleep. One honest conversation every Sunday night about work, stress, parenting, or anything else either of us was carrying. And one final promise written at the bottom of the page in larger letters than the rest. "We will never mistake silence for love again." Noah tore the page from the notebook and attached it to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a tiny lighthouse that my mother had given us years earlier. We both laughed at the coincidence. "Maybe we were always meant to find our way back," I said quietly. Noah squeezed my hand. "Not because we never lost sight of each other," he replied. "Because we finally admitted we needed the light." 1 year later, the little white notebook page was still hanging on our refrigerator, its edges slightly curled from countless mornings and late-night conversations. The promises written across it had not made life perfect, but they had changed the way we lived inside it. Noah no longer measured success by how many hours he stayed at the office. The recovery project had succeeded, every member of his team had kept their job, and he now walked through the front door before dinner more evenings than not. Some weeks, unexpected meetings still appeared, and deadlines still demanded extra attention, but now he called instead of disappearing into silence. Sometimes the conversation lasted only 2 minutes. Sometimes it lasted 20. The difference was that neither of us had to guess anymore. Lily had just celebrated her second birthday, and the house that once felt painfully quiet was now filled with laughter, tiny footsteps, and endless questions about everything she discovered. She loved books, peanut butter sandwiches cut into little stars, and chasing bubbles across the backyard until she collapsed into giggles. Every evening she insisted that both of us read her bedtime stories together, refusing to let either parent skip a page. Noah always claimed she had inherited my stubbornness. I always reminded him that she had definitely inherited his smile. One cool Saturday afternoon, we finally made the trip to Maine that had almost remained hidden inside a drawer forever. The small cabin overlooked the rocky shoreline exactly as Noah had planned. We walked hand in hand along the coast while Lily pointed excitedly at every seagull she could find. When we reached the lighthouse, Noah looked at me with the same shy expression he had worn years earlier during our very first date. "Worth the wait?" he asked. I smiled and rested my head against his shoulder. "The lighthouse was beautiful," I answered. "But the person standing beside me was always the destination." He laughed quietly, and together we watched the waves roll steadily toward the shore. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep in the travel crib, Noah stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. We sat beneath a sky filled with more stars than either of us had seen in years. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked softly. I knew exactly which night he meant. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly because it reminds me how easy it is for 2 people who love each other to become strangers when they stop saying the quiet things out loud." Noah nodded slowly. "I still wish I had trusted you sooner." I reached for his hand. "And I still wish I had asked one more question instead of assuming I already knew the answer." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that no longer carried fear because it was built on understanding instead of distance. A few months after returning home, Lily discovered an old storage box while helping us clean the hall closet. She pulled out the baby monitor we had used when she was an infant and held it up with both hands. "What is this?" she asked. Noah and I looked at each other before smiling at the same time. I gently took the monitor from her and turned it over in my hands. The plastic was slightly scratched, and the screen no longer held much of a charge, but it still felt strangely precious. Noah wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "That little thing reminded your parents that listening is just as important as speaking," he said with a warm smile. Lily nodded as though the answer made perfect sense before running off to search for another treasure hidden somewhere in the closet. I placed the monitor on a shelf in our living room beside a framed family photograph taken on the coast of Maine, where all three of us were laughing at something none of us could remember anymore. Visitors occasionally asked why we kept an old baby monitor on display instead of throwing it away. We always smiled before giving the same simple answer. Some objects are valuable not because of what they are, but because of what they helped people find. For us, it was never just a device. It was the unexpected beginning of the first truly honest conversation that saved our family, and every time I walked past that shelf, I remembered one lesson I hoped I would never forget again. Love does not disappear in silence, but it can become impossible to recognize unless someone is brave enough to finally speak, and someone else is willing to truly listen.